Welcome back to ChRAWnology, ladies and gentlemen. It's an episode-by-episode recap of WWF's Monday Night Raw from episode 1 up until time stops and the universe stops expanding. I'm Dave Thackera. That is Neil Trauma. Hi, Neil.
Hey, Dave, and I got to correct you right off the bat here because it's from the start until quite possibly until today, because we don't know when these Raws are going to disappear on the WWE Network, but we will pick them back up whenever we can, and then we're going to go until the universe implodes.
Here we are, me, casual wrestling fan, Neil, super expert in all things spandex. And we've done 9 of these things. We're in double digits, Neil. I'm super excited about it. But this is, and I don't know if we need to dwell on this very much, but this is like an anniversary show. This is a deja vu show for us.
It is, because way back, long time ago, like December, when we decided we were going to do this podcast, we decided that we would do just pick a random show and we would record a podcast on it so we could kind of learn how to record and see what we did wrong. And I mean, don't get me wrong, we haven't actually figured out what we're doing wrong yet. But
No.
This was the random show we picked. And boy, Dave, I'm so glad we got to see this show twice.
Yeah, if it was good the first time around, I can only imagine how much more we're going to like it this time. But it is episode 10 for March 22nd, 1993. In the real world, that was just 4 days before we saw the last of Ray Combs on Family Feud. The last of his episodes aired just a couple of days after this show did. We're not going to dwell on Ray Combs and what happened to him in real life, but just know that that's going on.
Hey, he was a big part of the WWF, too. Ray Combs was a part of Wrestlemania 8, and he will actually not only appear at, but do commentary on the Survivor Series here in this year, 1993. So
Oh, no.
Ray Combs will actually be a part of the WWF as we continue with these shows.
Honest to God, I had no idea about that. Okay. On the record charts, Depeche Mode was number 1 with their album Songs of Faith and Devotion, one of Neil's favorites. And this was smack dab in the middle of March Madness 1993 that would eventually see North Carolina with Dean Smith taking the overall title, but that was the championship game against the Fab Five from Michigan where Chris Webber calls timeout that he didn't have and blah, blah, blah. That was happening right around this time that this episode of Raw was happening.
That was a pretty legendary, screwed up cluster of a finish to that championship game. And speaking of screwed up clusters, Dave, we watched this show back in December, and then we somehow decided we were going to do this podcast.
Yeah, we make questionable decisions from time to time, and I think this is just a living example of that. But we're committed now. We are pot committed, as they say. Why don't we just carry on? We've got the beginning of the episode with Vince McMahon, the real Vince McMahon, back once again, dropping names like Abe Hirschfield. Neil, do you know who Abe Hirschfield is?
I have absolutely no earthly idea who Abe Hirschfield is.
Well, let me ask you this. How many times have you been to New York City in your lifetime?
Well, I've been to New York City quite a few times, so should I know this?
Have you been pleased with the amount of money you have to pay in order to park your car once you drive there?
Let's just go with no.
Abe Hirschfield was what we describe as, from his obituary anyway, a parking garage tycoon and billionaire. So remember that in the early 90s, if your family was driving to New York City and you paid money for parking, chances are that money trickled up to a man named Abe Hirschfield.
That son of a bitch.
This was important enough for Vince McMahon to compare our boy Rob Bartlett to the WWF's answer to Abe Hirschfield, who, again, if the first line of your obituary says that you're the eccentric billionaire and you made a series of questionable decisions in your life, that's the first line of your obituary, and you're getting compared to him on national TV, cable or otherwise, that's a pretty veiled insult from Vince to our boy Rob Bartlett.
Come on, I wouldn't mind being an eccentric tycoon. That sounds like a lot of fun. An eccentric billionaire. I'd do it.
Fair enough. Well, Macho Man is there taking the microphone reins as usual. He's, to be honest, I didn't actually see what he was wearing today, so I don't know what the macho outfit was like, but I bet you it was great.
I wasn't paying attention either. I was too distracted by the Bushwhackers doing their entrance up in the balcony, which was actually kind of fun.
This is really fun because the Bushwhackers are a fun character. The Bushwhackers are a fun tag team. But the first 10 minutes of the show is basically Vince screaming in usual Vince McMahon fashion, and we're waiting for the Bushwhackers to get to the ring. There are episodes of Raw that start out with a bang, and this wasn't one of them.
Well, yeah, it's like the Bushwhackers decided they were going to do the balcony entrance while they were already waiting to go through the curtain. So we had to wait for them to go find the steps and walk upstairs and then find the aisleway, and yeah, there they were. But hey, their
I mean,
opponents, you talk about two mega stars, Dave. They're going to take on Damien Demento and the Repo Man.
again, another dartboard matchup where somebody spins a wheel or throws a dart at a board, and all of a sudden we get these two superstars together. Okay, great. But the real stars of this match were, in fact, the Bushwhackers, who, true story, both of them look like great uncles of mine. And I did actually have a great uncle, Butch. Um, but they got to the ring. They met the ring girl who looked like my great aunt Mildred. So this is like a flashback to family gatherings that I've had from
At
years
least she didn't look
past.
like your great aunt Luke.
Well, the Troyan side of the family was a bit rough from time to time. But I will say this: the match itself, pretty bad. But I do like the Bushwhackers. I do like the fact that they don't take themselves seriously. The match didn't really take itself seriously. It for when it actually started, it had a lot of action and it sort of came and went. And there was the usual bit of Bushwhackers antics, and eventually they'd get the pinfall over the randomized tag team of Demento and Repo.
Yeah, there was. I think there was a random point in there where they almost killed Demento with a move or two, and then they redid the move and almost killed him again. But whatever. It was fun for what it was. Although I'm a little confused why we're seeing a match like this so close to WrestleMania when like Demento and Repo Man are way down on the ladder right now. And in fact, this may be the last appearance ever of the Repo Man. I didn't look it up this time, but I feel like I dropped that stat on you the first time we did this show. I think if it's not the Repo Man's last appearance, he is definitely on the way out the door. And the Bushwhackers are the Bushwhackers. They're just floating around being a comedy tag team dudes. So I don't really get why this happened, but it was inoffensive enough, I suppose.
Well, again, it's the show before WrestleMania. You want to encourage people to buy the pay per view. I guess you're not going to use all your superstars in actual matches, but why not at least bring them out to talk about the fact that they're going to beat someone and then squash them? Like, why didn't we see Bret Hart? Why didn't we see Beefcake? Why didn't I? Obviously, not the Hulkster. He's probably too big for this, but like, if you're trying to get people to buy a pay per view and you're showing me the Bushwhackers and Damien Demento, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep my $29.95.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, at least the next match at least promotes something on the pay per view. So who do we get next?
Match number 2, it's Tatanka taking on somebody named Reno
I
Riggins.
think Reno Riggins stole Jimmy Snuka's gear. He was there.
This was a battle of so many chops to the chest, I lost track. It's one of those wrestling moves. Ric Flair did it a ton. I never really got into it, but I'm watching this match going, this is an uncomfortable amount of slapping that's happening in the middle of this match.
Well, I mean, come on, Dave. Tatanka's chops hurt more because he's an Indian. And of course, he chops like a
Uh-uh.
tomahawk chop. Get it?
Native American. I guess they do hurt more. Fine. The match came, the match went. Tatanka saluting the crowd afterwards with what to me looked like a Nazi salute, but we're going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say it's a Native American thing, and we'll move on.
Yeah. And then we get to the best part of the show, actually, if we're going to be honest.
Yeah, this was really well done. I'm not going to lie. The Andre the Giant Hall of Fame video, we lost Andre not too long before this happened. And it was a really sentimental, slow-mo video highlight of his career with gently tinkling piano going on in the background. One of those montages, the In Memoriam montage. And I teared up. I'm not gonna lie. This sort of hit an emotional nerve in me. Maybe it's just because I just had my 40th birthday and thoughts of mortality are all around me. But this triggered a response in me.
Yeah, and I mean, Andre was a huge star, had such a connection to so many people in the audience, and I think he was legitimately a very good friend of Vince's. So you knew Vince was going to have them put together something good, and they end up creating the entire Hall of Fame just so they could have an excuse to pay tribute to Andre, which is pretty cool. All things being equal, this video is pretty tame compared to the kind of historical videos you would get today. But for the time, it was something we basically never ever saw because you didn't have huge stars like Andre dying all the time, thankfully, although that would unfortunately change as we move through the years of these Raw. But even
That's a
in the
trend that
10
would not
episodes, the 10
continue.
weeks we've done, Kerry Von Erich, who was the Intercontinental Champion a couple years earlier, died. And just last week, Dino Bravo died. We didn't mention it on our show. They didn't mention it on their show. Now, Von Erich committed suicide because he was going to go to jail for drug possession, and Dino Bravo was murdered in a mob hit. So I can understand why they didn't quite give him either of them the Heroes video package, but still, the dudes were big stars. They died, and it didn't even, warrant a glancing mention, whereas Andre gets this video. So, good for Andre, shows what a big star he was and how beloved he was, and just cool all around. Thumbs up for this part.
We move on to match number 3 with Money Inc., the defending tag team champions, about to enter their match at WrestleMania, one of the co-headlining events with the Mega Maniacs, Hulk Hogan and Brutus the Barber Beefcake. The Money Incorporated taking on two dudes.
Yeah, I didn't even catch their names. Did you?
Scott Rich and Jeff Armstrong. And I listen to Howard Finkel because if I listen to Vince McMahon, he didn't tell me the right names. He got their names wrong as the match was getting underway. Thanks, boss.
Yeah, not much to say here about this match. I mean, this is probably what they should be giving us on the last Raw before WrestleMania, which is Money Inc., who are in one of the main events, just squashing two dudes so that we can talk about their match and what a big deal it's going to be. And they're facing Hogan and Beefcake, and they don't pay much attention to it, really. They do the Rob Bartlett debuts on Raw, the flipping through the channels gimmick, which is, by the way, this week's quote-unquote proof that we're live. Bartlett shows the various things on the other TV stations at the same time as this live Raw. They would do this gimmick other times on Raw, so you can look forward to that as ChRAWnology moves on.
That's great, but one of the things that he focused on first, here's what's on another channel, was a Dick Van Dyke Show rerun, so you can't tell me that that's live if you're watching a show at that point from 30 years before.
It may have been. It may have been on Nick at Night, because Nick at Night was a thing at that point in the 90s, and they actually showed those kind of shows in prime time, because I used to watch them. They used to show things like Dick Van Dyke, Mr. Ed. That may have legitimately been on a Monday night in 1993.
It probably was, but let's just say that Columbo would have an easy time disproving that alibi. You know what I mean? After Money Inc., amazingly, holds on to their belts and defeats Scott Rich and Jeff Armstrong, we get the WrestleMania report. Yay! That was more enthusiasm than I feel like it deserved. But, we're trying to sell WrestleMania as well as Mean Gene Okerlund is.
Yeah.
This is the difference to me of watching these shows in a binge-watching fashion like we're doing, where we can sort of watch it whenever we want, even though we do it like a week apart. If you're binging these shows and it's the same build-up to the same WrestleMania and you're just watching back to back to back, you're spending 3 hours of your life watching like 3 of these shows back to back to back, boy, it's easy to just sort of fast forward past this because it's not like anything remotely remarkable happens.
Well, and this is the thing. I mean, we're going to talk about WrestleMania more at the end of this show, but it just, nothing seems to change with the build to this WrestleMania. There's no angles. Nothing really happens. Everything that's being promoted on the show is based off of stuff that happened literally months ago. This is the end of March, and there's stuff from the Royal Rumble and before that's being used to build up matches for WrestleMania. So, I mean, they've totally given up at this point anyway. Gene spends most of the time talking about togas and how it's going to look like Rome when they're there. They know that the matches aren't selling this show, and they're just praying that someone's going to watch it because it's going to look different than other shows. And they're really grasping at straws at this point.
It's got the name WrestleMania. They're promising scantily clad Mean Gene Okerlund. I mean, come on.
I mean, he literally does. He promotes it by saying, "We're going to wear togas. I just got mine in the mail, and it's like a piece of string." Okay, Gene, I can't wait.
That may have actually inspired the Seinfeld bit where George is posing seductively on a couch.
Maybe. There's a lot of similarities there.
Match number 4, Doink, the evil clown Doink, and Kamala in, okay, we're here. We've got the Ugandan giant Kamala, as Vince is saying things like, yeah, I bet science doesn't come into a whole lot of his life.
Yeah.
Again, this is 1993,
Terrible.
not 2021,
Terrible.
but come on.
Yeah.
And Doink and Kamala get into what can best be described as a hodgepodge of wrestling moves with a minimum of actual content.
I love preposterous gimmicks in wrestling. It was one of the things I love about wrestling. So in that regard, Doink versus Kamala is everything I love about wrestling, but it's also everything I hate about wrestling, because It's really dumb. Nothing really lands. It's a terrible match. And it's also one of those things where, like, it's one of those wrestling moments where you're literally embarrassed if somebody walks into the room and catches you watching it. It's like, and in fact, I'm going to tell this story real quickly. Literally, my wife doesn't watch wrestling, will not watch it with me, except for one time a year. She'll watch the Royal Rumble because she likes doing a Royal Rumble pool, but she won't watch it with me any other time of year. And I think it's almost entirely because of these idiotic gimmicks. Because early on in the time we were dating, I tried to get her to watch Raw with me, and we just happened to turn it on. And the match in the ring was some kind of preposterous 6-man tag that they were doing for a joke. And I think Doink was in there, and Kamala was in there, and the Boogeyman was in there, and she just looked at me like I was insane. And I don't know how we ended up being married and having a child together. She didn't just walk out right at that moment. But
Oh, that was before the marriage. Oh, wow.
exactly, it was before she had ample opportunity to rethink things, and she stuck it
Oh,
out. But yeah, Doink versus Kamala almost wrecked my marriage. So yeah, this match was not good. Neither was the main event segment of the show, which was the sort of middle-aged and overweight Raw girls who were the
my
Rosati
great aunts.
sisters from the Bobby
Yep.
Heenan show, hitting on Rob Bartlett. I don't understand why that was the main event of the show. I don't know why that was our go home. Our two go home angles leading into WrestleMania 9 were Doink tricking Kamala with a present, and then the Rosati sisters hitting on Rob Bartlett. And they wonder why this is generally regarded as the worst WrestleMania of all time.
Yeah, not
Which,
a lot of
yes,
creative.
Dave, this may be news to you and the listeners. This was the go home show for
Oh,
WrestleMania 9.
no.
Literally, we're done. This is it. We're not going to do another chronology before WrestleMania 9. Next week, there is a Raw, but it's just video packages promoting WrestleMania, and it's going to show some matches from the March to WrestleMania 9 show that they were airing on USA Network that weekend as a primetime special. That show's on the network, but the episode of Raw is not. I guess it's not considered an official Raw. So we are done. And now this is usually the point in the show when you do Dave's Let Me Ask You Something. Now, do you have one prepared?
Mhm.
Because if not, I can debut the first ever version of Neil's Dave Let Me Ask You Something, because I have
Let's
questions for
do it.
you.
I have a question, but that one can easily wait. So, Neil, please,
Okay.
let's go.
I have two questions for you, first of all.
Yep,
You've now watched every Raw leading up to WrestleMania 9.
all 10 of them.
Without looking anything up, what are the matches at WrestleMania 9, Dave?
Okay, I know. Okay. Thank you for putting me on the spot. I feel like I've paid attention enough where I
Because
can
you're
answer
supposed
this
to be watching this
confidently.
as a fan. So I want to
Right.
see if these guys did a good job or not promoting their biggest show of the year. What are the matches
Let
at WrestleMania?
let me just say this. I can think of a few, but if there was no WrestleMania report in the middle of these Raws, I'd really have no idea. So I know that the Mega Maniacs, Hulk Hogan and Brutus Beefcake, are going to be taking on Money Incorporated for the tag team titles. I know that Bret Hart and Yokozuna are going to meet for the WWF title. I also know that Tatanka is going to be meeting Shawn Michaels. And is there a belt involved in that? Is there? There's probably a belt
That's the
involved in that.
Intercontinental Championship
The
match, yes.
Intercontinental Championship. Okay. Furthermore, we've got Giant Gonzalez and The Undertaker in a match of I can't believe that I'm actually going to spend minutes of my life watching this. And that's it. That's all I got. I don't know who else is going to be on the show.
I had a feeling that that was as far as you were going to get. I thought maybe you would get one more because we just saw the guy in a match. There's also Doink versus Crush, which they have
Ah,
promoted.
they did say that in the middle of this episode.
They also have on these shows promoted Mr. Perfect versus the Narcissist. Do you remember any of that?
That was like it was about 3 weeks ago since we saw either of those. 2 or 3 weeks, right?
I think so. There was a Luger match sort of recently, but I'm also going to was Perfect on last week? I don't even remember. Was last week the Blizzard?
Last week was the
So, all
Blizzard
right. So it's
show.
been 2 weeks since they've
Yeah.
promoted anything meaningful because of the Blizzard. Now, these other matches, I wasn't sure if it was promoted at any point. The Steiner brothers are going to face the Head Shrinkers. I don't know if that was ever mentioned on Raw.
No.
And I'm certain that the rest of the card was not mentioned on Raw. Now,
All right. Well,
I went out and
don't
bought
ruin it for me we're gonna watch WrestleMania 9. I have to see this.
You are
train
going to
wreck.
watch WrestleMania 9. Okay, because
I
that was going to lead to my next question for you. And I'm going to ask you this anyway because I won't spoil it. But Dave, do you know what happens at the end of WrestleMania 9? Do you know how that show ends? Because
I mean,
it's pretty
I gotta
intense.
imagine that the Mega Maniacs win their match and get the belts. I got to imagine that Bret Hart holds on to his belt against Yokozuna. Wait, no, Yokozuna won the title at some point. Was it here? I don't know. I genuinely don't know what happens, and I definitely don't know what happens at the end because I literally don't know what the last match is.
All right, Dave. Well, I have watched WrestleMania 9 many, many times in my life, including this past weekend, just in case. So you watch it, and we're going to do a special episode of Chronology on WrestleMania 9. And I can't wait.
I can't either. So, Neil, who is your MVP for Raw episode 10?
Oh, man. I didn't even think about that. My MVP of Raw, I don't know, maybe Tatanka. I mean, he had a
Sure.
kind of a good match. Sure.
Sure, Tatanka, why not? I'm going to pick the Bushwhackers
Oh,
just because
yeah. We're up in the balcony. Switch mine to the
if,
Bushwhackers. I'll take the Bushwhackers too.
if we spent that much of the episode waiting for the Bushwhackers, then that means that they were the most important people in this episode because we spent more time talking about them than anything else. Bushwhackers, you are my and our MVP for the week.
That's it.
That's it. We're done. Episode 10 of Chronology. Neil, if people want to find us, where can they find us?
PlaceToBeNation.com, the Place to Be Wrestling feed. You can also search for us on Spotify. And if you Google Chronology, we actually come up. So go ahead and do that. Just make sure you get Raw in the middle of Chronology. If you're listening to us right now, I would imagine you found us somehow anyway.
It's a pun. They're great. He's Neil Trauma. I'm Dave Thakara. We will see you next week for episode WrestleMania 9.
WrestleMania 9!